Hey there, how's it going? This video is going to cover combining the health bar, the for loop, and arrays all into one fancy schmancy video. So file, open, we're going to go ahead and find our using health bar assignment from before. So I saved mine as Mr. Davis using health bar. Let's just open that up. And then we're going to rename it and create an extra copy of it by clicking File, Save As. And we are going to call this, instead of using health bar, we are going to call it for loops, arrays, and health bar. Okay, something along those lines. And then press save. I already had one, so just saving over. So how does this work? Well, right now we added our two dodges to the stage and they move across, and when they hit the player, and it does a bunch of fancy stuff. But right now, if we want to add another dodge, we have to add a lot of code. We have to drag another dodge onto the stage, give it a name. Let me just go through this really quick. We'd have to, say move dodge 3 to the left, add an if statement, do the hit test, and yada yada yada, blah blah blah. So let's use a for loop to make this a little bit better and a little bit nicer. So first thing we want to do is in the library, click on dodge, right click, select properties, and we need to export it for ActionScript. So make sure your advanced tab is down, so just by clicking on it, and then make sure the class is dodge with an uppercase D. So then we can click OK. So what we're going to do now is, on our actions on the very top, we're going to create a var called I for our for loop. So we can just say for the for loops, so that way we have something to count. And we're also going to make a function called initialize, which we're just going to call this the very first frame to do some initialization, just setting up their game pretty much. So a couple lines underneath that, we'll just call it by saying initialize, open close parentheses. Okay? So now we need to do some funky code in the initialize function. So I'm going to say for I equals 0. Okay, as long as I is less than 2, so that'll give us two things total, 0 and 1. We'll say I plus plus. Okay, and then closing parentheses and our two curly brackets. And once we have that, well, let's just add on some dodges from our library using code. So right above that, we'll make a variable called temp dodge. The type will be dodge, just like we exported in our library. So then inside of our for loop, we want to say temp dodge equals new dodge, and then we'll just add it to our stage or our timeline. So add child temp dodge. Okay, so what this should do is add two dodges to our stage that won't actually be moving or anything yet, but it should just add them. And there they are in the top left over here. But you can't tell that there's two of them because they're in the same exact spot. So let's do a little bit of coding. And before we add temp dodge to the stage, let's say temp dodge dot y will equal, let's do a random function. So we'll say math.random, which will return a value between 0 and 1, times stage dot stage height. So this will just give us a random spot on the stage to place our objects. Okay, so now what should happen is if we run, we should get our two dodges somewhere on the left right now, just add two separate spaces. They might end up overlapping, but as long as there's two of them, we're good. So there's our two. Okay, we're also going to need to set them to the right of our stage. So before we do the y, we'll say temp dodge dot x equals stage dot stage width. And let's just add on temp dodge's width, so that way they're all the way off the screen when they start. Okay, so it'll be all the way to the right plus however wide they are, so they'll be a little bit off plus more. Okay, so once we have that, we need to actually move them. But how do we do that? How do we access those dodges from down here? Well, before we add the dodge to the stage, we can actually throw it into an array. So in initialize, we would have to add it to the array there. So we need an array. We'll say var at the top, dodge, D-O-D-G, dodge array. Okay, it'll be an array. and it'll just be equal to a new array. That'll be empty, okay? So array for holding dodges. So instead of just adding temp dodge to the stage, we want to push it into that array. So after we add it to the stage, we're going to say dodge array dot push whatever was in temp dodge at the time, okay? So what this is going to do is we're going to take that temp dodge, put it in this array, and later we can access it from code by using a for loop. So let's test this out by copying our whole entire for loop. And in our move objects, let's see if we can get our new dodges to actually move across the stage. So before we move them to the left here, let's paste this. So remember, we still have those two from before. And all we're going to do is say, delete all that, we'll say dodge array. We'll access whatever one we're accessing right now, so I. And we'll say dot x, so we'll take the x property of that dodge and move it over by 5. So if this is all working, our new dodges should now move to the left. They're not going to wrap, but they're going to move to the left. And as you can see, they moved to the left. So this is working perfectly. So now, instead of having to do all this stuff, let's just, put them all in this array, right? So we did the minus equals 5. Let's do the wrap. So let's copy this from dodge 1 over here. Okay, oops, and make sure you tab it out so it looks nice. Let's start labeling stuff. So move to the left, wrap. Okay, so instead of dodge 1, we want dodge array I. So just copy this, double click, and then paste. Double click, paste, double click, paste, double click, paste. And that looks good enough for me. And then let's do the hit. So we'll copy this here. So from hit, paste. Instead of hit test object dodge 1, we want to do hit test object dodge array I. And then we'll do damage. So if we hit, do damage. Okay. And now let's get rid of our old dodge codes, dodge 1, dodge 2. It's basically from underneath here all the way down to the bottom of our move objects function. So hit delete, save, and let's remove those dodges from the main code here. Okay, so delete, save, run, and now we have 2 dodges that work, and it's all with code. But let's say I wanted more than 2 dodges, right? Well, we'd want to change how many we add in the top here. So let's make this a variable, and we'll say var num dodges. It'll be an int, and let's just set it equal to, let's say 5. We'll have 5 dodges. So num dodges equals 5. We'll copy it, and then what we can do is say, instead of less than 2, we can say less than number of dodges here. Okay, so this should create 5. And if we run this, there's going to be one problem, and that we're only going to be moving 2 of our dodges. And why is that? Well, the reason why this is going to work this way is because, well, we're only looping through 2 on the very bottom. So we said for I number of dodges, blah, blah, blah. On the very bottom over here, we only have 2, even though we set it to equal 5 at the top. So what we can do is, instead of trying to mess with this, arrays have a property called length. So we can say dodge array dot length, which should end up being whatever number of dodges we add into our array. So we're going to loop from 0 to dodge array's length, which should be 5, and that should loop all of our dodges. So here we go. We have all these dodges. Beautiful. But they all move at the same speed, right? So let's fix that as well. So in our dodges, find our library, double click, open this bad boy up. After first we make a new layer for actions, obviously. So we'll say actions. Okay, open up actions, and we need to make a variable called speed. And I believe the word speed is actually taken, so I'm going to say underscore speed. It'll be a number. And by default, let's set it equal to math.random, okay, times, what do we want to say? Say times 3, right? So 0 to 3. Let's put some parentheses around that. And then add what? What's a good number? 3? Yeah, we'll say 3. So 3 plus 3. So it'll get from, let's put a comment at the end, 3 to 6. So when it starts, it should do that. And then all we have to do is back in our main actions, okay, instead of moving by 5 in our move objects function, we'll just move it by dodge array I dot underscore speed, which is what we call that variable. So if you save now and run, our dodges should move at different speeds. And there we go. Okay. So let's say you wanted to add 30 of these things, right? You could simply go up here under num dodges and say, instead of 5, let's say 30. And it will actually add 30 of these things to the screen. So gets a little difficult, right? But I'm going to leave it at 30. And I'm going to make this a little easier for our player. So I'm going to go inside of our player movie clip and just shrink this down so that there's actually enough space for our player to move. So I shrunk that down. Let's shrink our dodge down as well. So in the library, double click, find dodge, and let's just shrink that down. Oops. So I'm using the free transform tool. Okay, so save. So you can play around with this number, maybe add it up to, you know, a lot more than just 30. But as you can see, we have a pretty cool game. And if we get hit, we lose some health. So for fun, I'm going to ramp mine up to like 60, and that'll be the end of this video. So if you don't care about this, you can stop watching and move on. I'm going to set mine to 60 so that there's a crazy amount of these things. And it's pretty difficult to to get through anything here. But there you have it. It's moving, it's fancy, it's schmancy, and we have a pretty cool game. So that's it for this video. Catch you later.